Good day to you. This is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. It's my great pleasure to bring Greg Ashton back for his third talk. If you want to see his other two talks, they're the ones previously for this one, prior to this one. Both excellent talks, probably in the top 10% of the interviews that we've done. And we're really looking forward to this one. A number of viewers asked if they could hear about Greg's experiences in the RECCE units, which was briefly touched upon in episode 1 and 2. So that's what we're going to be doing today, talking about his South African RECCE experiences. And one viewer made the comment that we should make Greg an honorary Rhodesian because of the affinity we share with this man. And I wholeheartedly support that. So as far as we're concerned, you're an honorary Rhodesian on this site, and you'll get a free drink in any Rhodesian meeting you ever go to. How about that? Right, Greg.
Thank you, Tony.
Over to you, Greg.
Good afternoon. I'm going to jump straight in. And for those of you who don't know or can't see, behind me are two badges just to cement my, call it career, and call it certification as a qualified operator in the South African Special Forces. I qualified in 1978, and as a qualified operator, that particular badge over there is the operator's badge, which you will see on various people's uniform, and the emblem to on my other side is this particular emblem, which I'm holding up here, and I have to get closer for you to see, and that's just a 50-year commemorative emblem that we had done on a coin for all of us as operators and those who participate in the Special Forces. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Tony had asked me about some of the operations, and I said I wanted to talk about 3 of them. And if you permit me, I'm going to be running more or less in a sequential process. So I'm going to start in 1979, after we had finished the war participation in Rhodesia at that stage, and that I talked about that in the previous video. And the area that I'm going to concentrate on is the southern part of Angola. Now, for South Africa and Southern Africa, Angola was of importance from a strategic, tactical, and also in terms of a longevity perspective. We were tactically and strategically trying to counter the Russian onslaught by the MPLA. Now, embedded with the MPLA in Angola was SWAPO. Now, SWAPO was trying to take over Namibia, or Southwest Africa as it was at that stage. We also had elements of the ANC and Mkhonto we Sizwe, strange enough, embedded with them. And over the years, quite often, we had come across some of the enemy, and they spoke fluent English and or Afrikaans, and they'd worked in the mines, and some of these who now had gone over to the other side in terms of working for or choosing to operate for the ANC. So any of the war that we were fighting in Angola was against the MPLA, which was Russian and Cuban backed, and then also obviously against SWAPO and also against the ANC. And that was collectively the whole bag of it. Now, the war had been ongoing for quite a number of years, nearly as long as the Rhodesian War. And Namibia, or Southwest Africa at that stage, was trying to counter the incursion from Angola and from Zambia, strange enough, because there were quite a few of the enemy encamped in both of those countries and being supported as well. The SWAPO that were based in Zambia had to come through a narrow strip called the Caprivi Strip and the southern part of Angola, if they so choose, the southeastern corner, and was easy access for them in this long corridor, which was the Namibian border, running from the west coast all the way down to Katima Malilu, where it joined up with the Zambezi River. I'm waffling a bit here, but I just wanted to create the picture for everybody. As part of trying to stop what was going to happen, strategically and tactically, we had to stop the enemy in their backyard, which was the best way, in fact, to be able to do that. And I take my hat off to a commander that I served under, who in fact was my selection officer as well, Hannes Venter, who was as tough as they come, a thorough and professional soldier. So I knew him from the get-go, from the start, from my selection course, and he took no prisoners, and I mean that. And I was fortunate enough in being selected. I went into Bravo Group at RECCE. We were based in Durban, and we operated primarily in the Namibian area going into Angola. Our task was generally to operate outside the borders, very much like the SAS did. We operated outside the borders, and as we're focusing on Angola and Southwest Africa, that's what I'm going to look at now. Part of the onslaught, if you want to use that term, by the MPLA in support of Russia, being supported by Russia and Cuban advisors, was to take over the bigger towns, and in so doing defeat Unita, who was in opposition to them. The Angolan Civil War had started 74, 75 when Portugal pulled out of Angola, and obviously it was a bun fight, and everybody wanted to get into it. But the MPLA by far had the biggest support in numbers, as well as in terms of the equipment, and I think the financial and military support that they were getting from Russia and Cuba. And we had to stop this. So it's fine standing at the border and patrolling and doing all of those things and getting people to come across, but you can also only do so much at such a time. And the guys would come over at night and they'd lay landmines, and very similar to what Rhodesia experienced, it becomes a war of terror on the local population through intimidation and various other means as well. We wanted to get a step ahead, and that would mean going into Angola, and the best way to do it is understand their method and means of operation, where they would be based, and more importantly, what their logistic supply routes were. Hannes Venter had prepared a plan, as I understand, and presented to General Officer Commanding of the South African Defence Force, as well as to General Officer Commanding of Special Forces, to say that this is what he envisaged and how it would be. And primarily it would be to attack the various supply routes, and just to really hamper any of the supply chains that were coming down, because the guys at the end would be on the receiving end, would find it extremely difficult. And that was what we were then tasked to do. So we had a number of small operations to do initially, and that was on the southern border of Angola. And what we were doing is really to hamper any of the trucks that were coming through. So there were a lot of dirt roads and so on in that particular area. It's semi-desert and semi-desert scrub. The more west you go, it's very, very dry. And so our task at that stage was to initially lay landmines in that particular area. Now, the landmines at this stage were a little bit more sophisticated to the cheese mines and the various other mines that the Russians and the Czechoslovakians were supplying, which worked on detonating device only. We took these, and we had an organization called EMLC, which were really like the spooks and ghosts, a bit like Q in his department in James Bond. And they played around with some of these devices and some of the technology we were going to use. Not all of it was great, but was better than the alternative. But it got better with anything else we were doing. So with time, these things started getting better and better. So our task initially was to work out the northern part of Southwest Africa. We were working out of a town called Oshikati, but we weren't in Oshikati itself. Oshikati is north of Ondangwa, and Ondangwa is the biggest military base, or was the biggest military base in Southwest Africa at that stage. But because of the type of work we're doing, they didn't want us to be seen or to be heard by anybody. So they took us and they dumped us in the bush under some trees, and they left us there. Okay, I'll explain a bit further. What they asked us to do was to be during the day to lie low. So we sat under the mapani trees and under the thorn trees, and we waited until nighttime, because the night is my friend. And if you understand that, when you work at night and you love the night and you can work in the bush, it gives you the advantage. And to a degree, that was the motto of 1 Reconnaissance Regiment. Okay, I'm just saying it was the motto. It wasn't the exact motto, but that's the way we like to think, because you could work under the cover of darkness and you can do great things. Until today, I still say to people, watch it, the night is my friend. So what we would do at nighttime, there was a runway close by, we would get kitted up, and we would be dropped by Dakota on a demarcated road, or a number of roads that we were then trying to sabotage. And our plan was to mine all of these roads and all these access roads and anything coming through the southern part of Angola to stop the trucks from coming through. So they drop us off in teams of 6. That's the way we would operate. And sometimes there'd be 3 teams of 6. So we'd be staggered and dropped off at intervals by the same Dakota on the same run at night. Normally we'd be dropped in at about 10 at night, where everybody's gone to sleep. There are no lights in that area. It's pitch dark. And I think in the time that we were operating, I might have seen 1 light, and there might have been a vehicle light in all that time. And this was over a period of 2-3 months. Every night we did the same thing. And we had a map in the operations room, and we would mark the areas that we had been covering so that there was no overlap. Jumping in, you jump in with 2 or 3 mines. And people say, only why 2 or 3 mines? First of all, the mines are heavy. Secondly, in a team of 6, you can't carry much more because you still got to carry your armaments and everything else you need with you, and a lot of water because it's very dry where you are. And then to lay the landmine is really, really difficult. It's sandy. Yes, it's sandy, but only the top bit, mostly 18 inches or so. You work it out, maybe 50 to 60 centimeters was sand, and underneath that, it is rock hard ground. So the normal means of operation was that we would walk to a debarcated area, and we plant the first of the mines. Our team leader would say, fine, this is where we're going to do it, because sometimes it might be on a curve or straight piece of road. We were looking for the best place to be able to do it. We would have 2 early morning guys out, which were the scouts along the side of the road. And then you would have 2 that would be planting the mine. You would have the control person and 1 covering the rear. And it was quite planned so that you'd have 2 ground sheets that you'd have there, because the ground sheet's important when you're laying the mine. You can't leave tracks. And you've got to work from the side of the road. And if the vehicles are going past, they're pushing up sand on the side of the road, because that soft sand is quite movable. It moves around quite a bit, and the wind would blow it as well. And you could be very careful. So you've got to take the top layer of sand off, which is white. As it lies in the sun, it bleaches white. And you've got to take that sand off, because you've got to cover it up again, and you put it to one side. Then you get the next bit of sand underneath, which is dark brown to black. And you've got to take all of that out. You put it onto the other ground sheet. Now you're getting into the hard ground underneath. And we used a number of devices to get in there. The guys would use their knives to be able to tackle this, but we found that we had a number of short cut-off heads of picks that we would use, and we would try to then hit the ground. You can't use a pick or anything else like that. The sound carries too far, and you're being very quiet. And the whole thing is that because the 2 guys are working, they're working very closely. If there's any noise or if a vehicle's coming past, they've got to be able to cover that up. They've got to withdraw when the vehicle comes past and not see it. You can't do all of that very quickly. So you've got to have quite an early warning system to make sure that if any vehicles are coming, they will, through internal communication, let the guys know. So once you've taken that hard soil out, you take it back behind you, because the displacement amount of soil that's been taken out will be taken up by the landmine. And the landmines we're using were the landmines that we'd got from MPLA and all over the place. I think even some of them came from Rhodesia. And these are the same landmines we were repurposing. So we put the landmine in. The landmine had now been adapted. So yes, it had a trigger mechanism, like all of them did. They had the trigger mechanism on the top. But we did something else to this as well, because we didn't want them to be lifted. So on the top of this, we had a plastic sheet. And inside the plastic sheet were 2 sets of gauze. The type of gauze that you would find on a mosquito net or something like that, but with a steel gauze, with a plastic sheet separating them as well, and to be sealed, so no water would get in, and the electrodes going in, they would be connected to the battery. This was used as an anti-prodding device, because if you were prodding this with a stick, with a bayonet or anything like it, would go through the outer layer of plastic, through the gauze, push that gauze through the sheet of plastic in between into the next one, contact would be made, your mine would detonate. So wow. It wasn't just you could use anything, whether it was plastic or anything like that, it would work, and it would work 99.9% of the time. We also had a light sensitive diode in there. So once you had covered it up and made sure it was covered, if they knew there was a landmine, they tried to uncover it. As soon as it was exposed to light, it would detonate. So you couldn't do that. We also had an anti-tilt device or anti-lift device. So it was liquid mercury in a switch, which was placed horizontally, put it in there, and if you disturb that and tipped in any way, it would also go off. And lastly, it had a sound sensor on there. So if a vehicle came over and it was right above it, but the wheels hadn't gone over the cheese mine, it would then trigger the mechanism and it would detonate. So it would be based on vibrations and vibration frequency. So this is what we did. We used to do 3 mines like that a night. So we'd parachute in, go and lay the mines. We'd take the soil that we'd taken out of the hole, we disperse it into the ground, and then we'd walk on maybe a kilometer or 2, and then lay another mine, and then do another mine. And then just before first light, we get picked up by helicopter and be taken out. I mentioned we did this for 3 months, yes.
How deep were those holes that you dug for a mine?
Well, the mine in depth is about that deep. So you got to go that depth plus maybe a little bit more. So it's not that much. That's about 15 to 20 centimeters that you're digging. But in diameter, it's mostly about 45 to 50 centimeters in diameter. And the ground is really hard. And to take that out, sometimes it would take as much as 45 minutes. It really takes a long time. So we would plant 3 landmines in the course of an evening. So you got 3 groups doing that. That's 9 landmines. Then we'd rendezvous at a point, and the helicopter would come through and pick us up early in the morning and take us out. So we used to sit in the door of the helicopter, as most of the guys did. And at this stage, we weren't using the Alouettes, we were using the Pumas. Puma flies a bit fast, and you sit in the door, it's nice and cool. Do you know, after a month of doing that, we were deaf. You couldn't hear because that buffeting of the helicopter rotors and the air in your ears, it affected our hearing. We'd be walking in the bush and you're trying to signal to somebody, and if you're going or anything like it, they couldn't hear you because we'd been doing this for too long. We actually got deaf. It took us a long time to recover and to get over that. So we did this first, and then we stopped. 1 or 2 of the landmines that we planted detonated by themselves. You know, the wind would shift, or maybe Buck would walk over it, or something would happen, but a few of them did go off. And we heard 1 or 2 during the course of the operations over the period of time we did. But once this had been completed, they stopped using this particular route because it was too hazardous for them. And they lost a lot of vehicle and personnel along the way. But that is only phase 1. Phase 2, we would start looking at other things. So if I was planning to do this, I would have done exactly the same. So what are your points of entry and what are your routes? Well, your points of entry primarily are the harbors. And what you have in the harbors are ships, and you have oil tankers, oil depots, and various other things that are in the harbors. Nice targets if you can get to them. The other, which is an easier target and a softer target, would be the rail line. But the rail line, as you'll see from the map, which I've supplied, that runs from Lobito inland, goes through the Serra de Leba Pass, high up in the mountains, and a nice place to be able to do it, or to attack a train like that, if you're going to attack the train or the railroad, would be in a tunnel. So this is what our operation was about. It was Operation Backlash. So as part of the normal process of preparation, the senior people know what's going on. I would say from team level downwards, you're a gopher, you don't know anything. I'm a 2-striper at this stage. I've been around a bit longer. I've been around long enough to be arrogant as well, and arrogant and stupid. I think the 2 go hand in hand. But Hannes Venter, who at this stage was major, he might have been lieutenant colonel or commandant, as we used to call them in those days. He kept a tight grip on us, and we were trained, we were fit, and we were ready. We just come back from the Rhodesian theater, and there was more stuff for us to go and do now. And so we were getting for the Operation Backlash. And we didn't know what it was about, but we were told these are the things we have to prepare for, and this is what we have to get ready for. So my team leader, Lieutenant Mark Notelowitz, got us ready by, first of all, preparing for the various train tunnels that we could see and train tracks and things like it. So in and around the Durban area, in the mountain passes, we went on recce's. We used to go and visit these things and walk around. And the railway police, which we had in those days, didn't like it. The police didn't like it because, yeah, you got guys walking around going to have a look what is going on. And we were in civilian dress. Sometimes we were in military gear, but we were just going to have a look. And we were trying to identify some of the problems that we could come across if we're going to plan for this. One of the problems, I imagine, in a tunnel, if you want to blow up a tunnel, what do you do? But most people say, oh, you just stick explosives to the wall and Bob's your uncle. Well, it's a bit more than that because it's reinforced concrete. You need to know where the weakest points are on a tunnel. And normally it's the face of the tunnel. It would be on the inside. But remember, a tunnel is generally, it's dug out of a mountain. There's rock. So it's been reinforced. It's strong. And anything you want to put up or use to blow up a tunnel is either going to be knocked off or it's going to bounce back because You know, they say for every force is an equal, for every action there's an equal but opposite reaction. And the same would be applied here. And with explosives, you've got to put something behind it to tamp it. So it's a bit like on a dam wall, you've got volumes and volumes of water behind you and puts that pressure on the dam wall. The same way with explosive, you want to put as much pressure behind it, and they use sandbags, they use a number of things like that to be able to provide that backing power for when it needs to detonate. And it's for anything that you do primarily, except for a cutting charge on steel, which is slightly different. So if you're going to work on a mountain pass, a train track is either going to go this or it's going to do this. So it's not going to be level. And you've got to think of the amount of explosives you're going to need for this operation. So we did a calculation, and I think it was close on 2.5 tons of explosive we would need for this, plus various other charges and equipment that we would need to get it there. So we started practicing with this. We looked at call it a gantry or a little trolley that would fit on the railway tracks with the wheels, because you're going to use the tracks to be able to move your stuff on that you get the explosive and your equipment you're going to need for that. And a lot of explosives means a lot of manpower. So you've got to carry this wherever you're going to go, or you've got to offload it as close as you can. And if it's going to be in a mountain pass, invariably there's not going to be a nice landing spot there with a big H on there for the helicopter to come and land. You have to find a space to be able to do that. We didn't know what the weather was going to be like. Were we going to do it daytime or nighttime? But as the night is our friend, we assumed that we would be working at night. It's normally better, there are less people around. Also, how do you get all of the explosive to the top of a tunnel? Now, a tunnel is pretty high. If my memory serves me correctly, it's about 18 meters to the top of the tunnel on the arch at the top. How do you lift 2.5 tons of explosive to the top? So we had to work out all of these things, plus the type of charges we're going to do, and were we going to blow to one big charge, or we're going to do smaller charges, or whatever we're going to do. Because quite often, as I had alluded to in blowing up the bridges when we were approaching Mapai and Barajem, the bridges we were blowing on, some of them had steel girders on. You've got to blow away the steel first before you can do the concrete. We assumed the same here as well. And what you want to do, you want to weaken the concrete as much as you can to be able to give your explosive the best chance to be able to do the maximum damage to the tunnel, and hopefully to collapse it in its entirety, or at least collapse the mouth of the tunnel completely. So we started practicing at nighttime, again working. And it's nice in Durban during the winter months because often there's quite a bit of rain, the wind blows, and nobody likes being outside in the rain when you're doing things like this. But in the rain and the wind, we were out there practicing night after night after night to get ready for this. So we knew what the things were going to be in terms of obstacles, problems we would experience, wet and slippery equipment, your explosives, if they got wet, what was going to happen. We didn't know if this was going to be the case, but we were ready for that. The other thing we did, we started looking around for scaffolding, because how do we get stuff to where we're going to be going? And the solution we had was scaffolding. So we went to one of the local engineering companies and we inquired about the type of scaffolding, and eventually we came up with what we wanted. We bought a lot of the stuff, we brought it back, and we started practicing it to put the stuff up. And it's very easy to say, just lift it up there. Nighttime, you've got to hoist all the stuff to the top. You don't want to drop any of the explosives. Not that it's inert in the state that it is, but still you don't want to do it to drop it. And you need to be able to get to the top where we're going to put the charges. Plus, you need sandbags as well. So you've got to have sandbags. You've got to fill up, and you've got to be able to take those as well to be able to temp your charge. What you didn't think about, and that only came towards the end, is that we're putting up scaffolding, but it's on a railway track, which is an angle. So immediately your scaffolding is doing this, and it's going to fall over. So what we had to do, we had to build a mechanism on the trolley, because we wheeled this up on the trolley and got it to where we were going to do it. And then we put a mechanism underneath it. You could level it and you could jack that thing up so that it was perpendicular, and then build the pieces to the top to get to where we're going to go.
Really?
Then get ready to take the stuff up. The other part to this as well, this is where a bit of R&D comes in. If you're going to come in with a helicopter and say there are trees, say there are telephone lines, or power lines or anything like that, a helicopter cannot land, how are you going to debus or get out of the helicopter? Because the helicopter has to be on the ground. The aerial photographs could show us some of what the terrain looked like, but it wasn't the best, because obviously it's taken from very high up, black and white photographs, and the guys from intelligence, in terms of doing the photographic interpretation, could tell us some, but they weren't sure. But from what they could see, it looked like there was a telephone line going along there, but they couldn't see if it was a power line. So we were prepared for this. To get out of the helicopter and to abseil down, you would need some guys to go first. And you don't want to just throw a rope out, because throwing a rope out with no weight on the bottom, it can blow up into the rotors of the helicopter. You have a problem. The other thing, if you throw it down and it gets ensnared or entangled in power line trees or things like it, you've got another problem. So we developed a thing called a rappel bag, which to my knowledge was only used in that operation. So your whole abseiling rope was in a rappel bag, which was attached to your thigh and your lower leg with Velcro. And the first person to go out would then, with a figure 8 and a carabiner on the rope that would be attached to the helicopter, would go out, and the rope, instead of having a rope hanging below you, it would unfurl and come out of the bag that was on your leg, and so you'd go down. So we were ready for this. The other part of it is, once that's on the ground, what do we have to do? If the line's in place, do we have to blow them down, cut them down with chainsaws, all of these things? So look, we were prepared. We thought this through. And lastly, what were the best chances we had in terms of blowing up the tunnel? Did we need some other advice? Did we need to consult with some people to see what we're going to do? Which we did. We spoke to engineers and people like that. And they said the face of the tunnel on the outside is your hardest area, and that you need to crack first, like an egg, and to get through that. And to be able to do that, we'd have to blow hollow charges like they do in mining. With mining, they drill it. Sometimes they do blow it, but here we didn't have time to be able to drill. We couldn't take hydraulic drills with us. We'd have to blow it with a hollow charge, the same type of charge as an RPG. So we got these hollow charges, but they would then be on their side instead of vertically into the ground, and we'd have to hoist them up on the outside, and we'd have to detonate them first. Once they've detonated, they'd make a hole about 1 meter to 2 meters deep into the concrete. We'd have to take the concrete out in there. It's hot. You can't put any explosive in there because that heat and explosive, not a good mixture. It could go off. So we planned for this as well. The other component is a thing called the enemy. Yes, there are people in the area. There are residents in the area. There are locals. There are people like that as well. So we need to make sure that any of them are also then taken care of. And when I say taken care of, we have firepower and we had enough people out there. Our team wasn't big enough at this stage. So we drew on the resources of RECCE to provide additional people. So once the helicopters had dropped us off, they would go to a holding area, which wasn't too far away, but the holding area had to be protected. The helicopters were, because it was quite far in, if my memory serves me correctly, it's like 400 to 500 kilometers up from where we were. And what we need to do is make sure we had sufficient fuel. So fuel had to be taken in as well with all of the preparation. So we were ready for this. We decided to operate from Fort Rev, which is in Ondangwa, where RECCE was based, and was really a great place to work from. You know, it's like home on the range, except you're right on the runway. And so we had the helicopters prepared. We had 3 helicopters with us, and my memory serves me correctly, there were 1 or 2 additional support ones just in case anything would go wrong. And we were working with the Puma helicopter, which can carry about 12 people. But that means you're quite packed. And so we took off from Ondangwa late afternoon. I'm just trying to get a confirmation of the date when we went through for the operation so that people are not confused. This is in October 1979 when this happened. So late afternoon we took off. It's not the rainy season yet. It's still dry. And I remember taking off at sunset and flying over the southern part of Angola. It's like the moon. There's just nothing there. It's really, really, really dry. And we flew until we got to the lower foothills of the mountain. Then we climbed up to Leber Pass. Today, if you go up Leber Pass, there's a road there, but it snakes up and down in a zigzag formation. It is really a long road to get up there. And we had to climb quite high to get up to where we were. And there were 2 helicopters. The first one I was on, and there was a second one that came in with a load of all the explosives we had. And then the third one with additional men on there. Okay, so now we're flying over the southern part of Angola, which looks like a moonscape. Quite beautiful in a way. It's lonely, but there's something about the poet's eye. It made me think of a very fast version of Neil Diamond's song that he did for Jonathan Livingston Seagull about Lost Against the Painted Sky, where the clouds are hung by the poet's eye. But this was different in many ways. You know, and as we're talking now, I just recollected there were actually a whole lot more in terms of the helicopters with us. I think there were 7 Pumas in total. some that were there to support us, but not directly involved in the operation. And there were some freelons as well. Now, the freelons are super freelon, which is a lot bigger as well. You know, you got to have contingencies, and if things go wrong, everything had been planned for. So as much as we prepared for the operation on our side, the Air Force and the top brass had planned for all of the other contingencies, because, you know, you have things such as anti-aircraft, you have the enemy aircraft that could come in, you have ground forces, there's a whole lot of other things to be taken into account. And obviously fuel and supplies were important to get everybody there, do the operation, bring them back. So I was in the first helicopter that went in with Mark Natalovitz and his in charge. One of the guys who was with us was Rolf Moore. Now, Rolf had served with the Zulu Scouts as well. He was then the staff sergeant with us, or Rolf the Rat, as we used to call him. And he was part of the team that was to go in, but he'd hurt his back in a previous operation, and to carry a heavy load and so on, he struggled a bit, but we needed him there because his knowledge from explosive perspective was really good. Anyway, so when we got to the location where we had to rappel out of the helicopter, I went out the door first on the one side, and I don't recall who went down on the other side. With our bags on our legs, rappelled down to the ground, and as we planned, we landed on the ground, and there were telephone poles with 2 strands of wire going across, which would make it difficult for any helicopter coming, because the rotor blades were really close to the telephone wires, and the last thing you want to do is snag that and have a helicopter down. So we detached ourselves. We had explosives with us, and the idea was to then go to the pole, put the explosive on, a quick charge, detonate it, blow it away. It's just a small charge we pre-prepared. We did this to 2 sets of poles. The helicopter lifted, went away, and was in a holding area for a while. We blew the poles. To get to the poles is difficult because it's on a steep incline and so on. I nearly fell down this steep incline. It was quite a long way down, but just to get to that. But, you know, you manage, and I found some poles, some bush, and I pressed against it, put it up, detonated it. Both of them went off within seconds of each other. And there the poles were hanging on the wire. They didn't go away, but they were far enough away for the helicopters still coming. But you had these telephone poles hanging on the wire, swinging over the gorge below us, because we were very high up. We had an area which I would say was about 200 to 300 meters of open rail or semi-open rail, between a bit of a hillock on the left-hand side as I'm facing west at the moment, and to our right the tunnel was going up the railway line. Had a gentle gradient, but you could see from where we were and where the tunnel was at 200 meters away, it most probably was a good 30 to 40 meters higher. So it's going up at a fair incline. Once the poles for the telephone lines had been blown, the helicopters came in. I was part of the defense team on the eastern side. I made sure that the guys landed, and when they landed, they were offloading the supplies and the equipment, the trolley, the scaffolding. I mean, that scaffolding took up nearly 1 helicopter on its own. The other and obviously we had the rest of the team on there. Then the next helicopter that came in was just loaded with the explosives, and it was heavy. The few guys on board helped to offload this. We offloaded all the stuff, put it onto the trolley, and we moved the stuff up, and the guys were carrying it up, because time is of the essence. We want to be on the ground for as short a period as possible. We don't know if there's going to be a train coming down. We don't know if the enemy forces in the area. You have no idea. But surprise was on our side. It was a clear night. It was great. So everybody had been offloaded, all the explosives and the equipment, and the helicopters flew off. We were in constant comms with them, and so we were waiting and ready. The guys who were at the face and who were loading the stuff, I felt sorry for. We'd all practiced this. I just wasn't part of that particular team in terms of doing it. It's the luck of the draw and how Mark had allocated the best people he thought was most suitable for this particular job. And we had a number of guys there, a guy called Marada Costa, who later on died in another operation, who was a really good demolitions expert in terms of helping us place the charges and get everything ready. So I mentioned earlier on that we'd have to blow holes in the face of the tunnel first with the hollow charges. So we had to hoist the hollow charges up. How do you anchor a thing about this size on big legs that stands about 1 meter high on the side of a tunnel, which is a near vertical wall? How do you do that? So we had ladders. First of all, we had these telescopic ladders. So the guys would climb up, and we had rope as well, climbing rope with the pitons and everything we need to get up there. But the ladders were doing a far better job and quicker, because where are you going to anchor a rope on a face like this? Guys got up with the ladder. So what we did, we had practiced. We had hilty guns with hilty nails and attachments on there. So we would put the hilty nails in on these straps, and they'd be attached to this, to the hollow charge. And the hollow charge looks a bit like a crab, like this. It's got 4 legs or 5 legs. You turn it sideways on the side, and what you're going to do then is suspend it on the cable with there, and then you anchor it as much as you can. And then your detonating cord and comes out the back. So we had all of them set up like this, look beautiful, like the old ladies used to have their hand curlers all the way like that. Had it all set up, and we detonated it. You know, in the silence of the night, when you don't hear anything moving, this explosion was deafening, and it echoes down the valley. I mean, we were really high up, and there were a lot of big villages quite far down in the valley. Yes, it's very flat and it's a long distance away, but I'm sure that they all heard this big blast, not knowing what it was. Now we have to wait to see what it looks like, and hopefully the charges have gone in deep enough, which they have. They all did. They all went in about a meter and a half. So what we got to do, we got to then pull out all the debris that's in there, because you want a deep hole as deep as you can go. And what we can do is we're using more of a low explosive instead of a high explosive, with a detonating cord, detonators at the bottom, pack it full, so that when you detonate it, you don't want it to have a cutting effect, you want a lifting effect. So it's like having a very strong diesel engine that doesn't have much speed, but it's got the grunt. The same thing. So you want to be able to lift all that concrete out and blow as much of it away as possible.
And did you blow 3 holes, 4 holes, or was it just the one, Greg?
No, there were a lot of holes. If I remember correctly, we did 5 or 6 holes. We did all around the arch of the tunnel at the top. You can't come down the sides, but you want to do the top piece like it before you have your supports on the side with your reinforced concrete. So you need that top bit, because that's also where your charge is going to, your main charge that you're going to use to blow the tunnel is going to be.
And that was all blown simultaneously.
Yeah. So what we did, we first of all blew the holes. As I mentioned, once it had cooled down, we then put in the other explosive in there, which was sort of in a slurry type format. We packed the stuff right in with a detonating cord coming out. Then we used a delay device, which I referred to early in my previous conversation, called a dog bone. And a dog bone gives 1/100th of a second delay in terms of the explosive charge if you're using cortex or detonating cord. And then the rest would go to the main charge, which would be underneath. So really what you wanted to do is to blow away the outer bit first, and then blow the inside, so that you damage the outside, and then you could do as much damage as you could on the inside. And once this was complete, and we had to clear away the debris off the railway track, we had the trolley up, moving all this stuff up to the mouth of the tunnel, raised the scaffolding, got it nice and level, and then the guys were passing the bags of explosive up. Got it all on top of a wooden frame we'd put on the top of the scaffolding, the platform, the top. Once this was there, we then had to put the sandbags around it. We had to prepare it, put the detonators in with the primers, get that all ready, and then jack it up to right against the platform. Now, remember, we'd practiced this before, and we had to make sure that it wasn't doing this. And we had these jack mechanisms, which were rotational screws, which pulled this thing up like this. So we got it right up underneath like that, as tight as we could get it there. Once this was ready, the guy said, fine, all the charges are primed, connected to the ones on the outside. It would be set off once we had been able to take off by helicopter. Everything was ready. We called the helicopters in. There were no incidents in the area where the helicopters were in the staged area where they were waiting for us. They came and collected us. We got on board, and then we took off. We must have been away from the area of operation where the tunnel was about 1.5 to 2 minutes when that sky to the north of us just lit up like this. You know the feel of success when that happens. It's just unbelievable. We didn't know what damage had been caused, but it was a successful operation. Then we flew back in the moonlight again. There's this eerie feeling when you're flying back. And it's a bit like going, I think, to a musical concert where you've been to the concert and all that euphoria and that adrenaline and everything else is the same. Now you're flying back. The only thing you've got to watch for now are people maybe shooting at you. And if I recall correctly, once or twice we saw traces and so on, but nothing that did any damage to us. And then we flew on back past Ipoopa Falls over the Kunene River, and then on our way back. So that was Operation Backlash. The outcome of that is that it stopped the trains. We didn't totally sink or collapse the whole tunnel. It's a bit impossible if you think of the thousands of tons of rock above the tunnel and so on, but they did enough damage to hamper trains going through there with supplies for months and months and months on end before they could repair it. So that was a good operation. And, I think our team did a great job. Thanks to Hannes Venter, to Mark, and all the guys who were involved in the preparation of the team. And, it's a long time ago since this happened. But to all my teammates that were there, it was a great operation.
And it appears that practice makes perfect. I mean, you've mentioned you practiced for that operation for weeks and weeks.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. And, it's like anything. If you do combat pistol shooting or anything like it, you got to practice and you got to rehearse, and you got to do it in different circumstances. And you have to be able to be ready to be able to take on whatever gets thrown at you. And, the small things that we prepared for that you don't think of. And, I remember the engineering company we bought the scaffolding from, because they knew we were in the military, we were using it for something. They said, so when do you think you're going to return it to us? We said, it's not coming back. We couldn't say why. We just said it's not coming back. So, it's funny little things like that,
No, that's an incredible talk, Greg. And then you moved on to something else further north later on, didn't you, or further west?
Yes, we did. The next operation is called Operation Agony. Now, it has been written about and has been talked about, but it was on one operation with two different components. And the one that was written about more so than the other, from what I've read and what I've been able to glean. And it's no fault of ours or anybody else. It's just people speak from their own perspective, and sometimes leave others out, and it's not purposefully done. Our job at this stage to further hamper the delivery of supplies in the Angolan theater by MPLA to the towns and the bases they had to be stepped up. Now, because Unita had control of most of the countryside, particularly in the southeastern area of Angola, a province called Cubango, that area is large, it's flat, and there are a lot of old Portuguese towns in the area. And a lot of these towns were now derelict. The Angolan Civil War and the battle between MPLA and Unita had damaged a lot of the towns, but the towns still had some infrastructure, where that might have only been buildings, but generally there was water and something else there. And so invariably they had a military base there, and they had trenches around, and they were able to fortify and defend themselves there. But if you can't bring supplies in by road, how are you going to get them to these remote places? You've got to fly them in. So the first part of our operation we planned on now had been successful. They couldn't get by rail anymore to the major towns, whether it be Quito, whatever the town might have been, as you're going more and more east. So they would then have to rely on transport planes. So there were a lot of the Antonovs that were flying in from the various bases with supplies. They would fly in, drop their supplies on the runway, and so they would keep the morale of the troops up, keep them fed, and give them enough ammunition. And we were going to go and stop that. At this stage, there were a number of small teams that were operating in the area. One of the photographs I showed you was a bunch of small teams, guys who had been working in the area. There were guys from one reconnaissance regiment and from 5 that had been operating in the area, doing different things. Most of it was collecting intelligence, because a small team most often is just 2 guys. Sometimes it's slightly bigger. And their role is to collect enough information and intelligence for us to utilize whatever that information might be and what they were tasked to do. So our brief at this stage from Ops Agony was to go up north as far as we could go, and we had to identify if some of the runways were still operational in a place called Mavinga. Now, Mavinga was north of where Unita had been based. They were Jumbo, but this was quite a bit further north of them. The territory held by MPLA, but we had to go and investigate up there. There were 2 parts of the operation. So we were on the Quito River, and the Quito River runs more or less from northwest to southeast, running down through Angola. It's a fairly broad river. In some places, dry season gets obviously a bit dry. In the rainy season, it is a flood river. It is really deep. Lots of crocodiles in the river, and the area is wild around there. A lot of that had been a nature park or game reserve before the war, and our task was then to go up close to Quito and to Mavinga, and now to go and stir as much as we could. So obviously we're looking at, our task was to go and reconnoiter the runway at Mavinga, and our team was under the leadership of Staff Sergeant Flip Marks, and there was another team under the leadership of, I think he was then Captain or Major Koos Verwey. At a later stage, he had been Casovac because of an injury, and Staff Sergeant Frans van Dijk then took over. He's had the rank of colonel by the time he retired. So I still think he was still Staff Sergeant at that stage. I stand corrected.
And that was 5 recce that you were in, is that right?
No, still 1 recce.
Okay.
Still 1 recce. So, as part of the operation, we did not know that the other team on the western side of the Quito River were operating, and they did not know that we were on the eastern side operating. And I think it's on a needs-to-know basis, in terms of going up there, what happened if anybody should get caught or whatever, because we're small teams. Our team was going to be on Sabres. Now, Sabre is a modified vehicle. They used to be initially Land Rovers, which we had based on the same that the SAS had used in North Africa. Sabre is great. The Land Rover is great, but the gearbox, the differential, and the ability in the sand makes it a bastard. I think a Mini and it can move better in the sand than these things can. They just are too heavy. And when you start putting armor plating on and you're starting putting armaments on, the half shafts break, and you have a plethora of problems that could happen. So we took Unimogs, which we then had modified. So EMLC, who I'd referred to previously, who were the Dirty Tricks department, had looked at modifying some of the Unimogs, and we ended up with 2 of them, which had been totally modified. When I say modified, the cab and the back came off completely. They put on a new cab and a new back, but they used armor-plated V underneath, so if we went over a landmine, it would offer us some protection because Unimog offers you 0. And they adapted them for what we're going to do. So the one that we had adapted had a 5.0 Browning, a twin-barrel 5.0 Browning on the top, and it had a swivel stand that was protected, and was really beautiful. And you could lean into it, and that's what it was built for. Had enough ammunition, had a protection on the sides. It was great, and you could knock the sides down if you needed to. The other one we had was an 81mm mortar Unimog on a similar basis, but you could knock it totally flat. The 81mm mortar could rotate, could swivel very quickly, which was great. The only thing taking into account that the Unimog rocks, it's got a coil spring suspension, not a blade spring suspension. And if you were to fire on that thing, like at the body would tilt like that. They brought out struts that we could use to support it and anchor it into the ground so that if you're using it, there was less movement, and your fire would be far better in terms of your accuracy and distance. We then had a third Unimog, which was stock standard basic Unimog, which we then had adapted because we needed another one. And what we did on this one, we took a stock standard Unimog, put down wooden flooring on the existing floor. We then put sandbags around it, and we took a 23mm gun that we had taken off the enemy, and we put it into the ground roll so that you can knock the wheels and so on flat, put it flat on there, and we could utilize this. So we put the it's actually an anti-aircraft gun on there, and we could utilize that.
A twin barrel or quad?
Single barrel.
Yeah, single barrel.
But it was done in such a way that we could rotate it fully. You got a roll bar on the back of the cab of a Unimog. We just had to be careful with that, so we couldn't really fire forward. But anywhere, I would say 310 or 320 degrees, anywhere else, we were capable of firing. So we had the 3 Unimogs. We had a team of 3 on each of them, and Flip Marks was the commander of the group. I was in command of the vehicle that we were on, which was the 5.0 Browning vehicle. And then we had other guys who were on their various others. So we were going to go in by Unimog, and we were going to join up with Unita. In the meantime, on the other side of the river, Koos Verwey and his team, we were walking in. Now, it's a long distance, about 300-400 kilometers you got to walk in. We'd done a lot of operations where we walked, and we walked a lot, but I felt sorry for them. But it was, dry season, there'd been fires and things like that. And walking like that, carrying your equipment, and when I start talking about equipment, I'll come to that now, and water, and it's dry, it's a long, long way to walk. Nobody wants to do it, but, that's the task, and we've done operations where we'd walked a lot further than that, but they were going up that way. The equipment we were carrying was our normal armaments. Remember, at this stage, I was carrying a Beretta 223. It wasn't an AK-47. Nice little weapon, had a steel butt which folded and so on. Nice to use. So it's a 223 or 5.56 caliber that we were using. And we were dressed in sort of it looked like a British camouflage. You will see it on the picture that I sent you. And that was the pattern of our camouflage that we wore, very different. And for people who don't know, when you're operating in an area like this, everything that you have that would denote or identify you as South African gets removed. It's very difficult for the Afrikaans-speaking guys who have heavy Afrikaans accents to remove that accent. It is difficult, but I suppose there's a way around it. But everything on your drips, on your medication, and any food you've got, you spend days and days preparing that stuff, and you remove anything that has anything to do with South Africa, if it was Zimbabwe or Namibia, anything like it. So there's no ties to you whatsoever. So that's part of your operational kit. So we had our backpacks with our operational fighting kit and our weapons with us, and the rest of the team they had a commando mortar with them. We had various machine guns. I think we were carrying RPDs and not PKMs. So we were dressed as though if we got off, we could fight, we could go move into the bush and do whatever we had. And we had rations and water in our backpacks. So we were prepared just as much as the team, Koos Verwey's team, were prepared as well. So our route we went was from Fort Doppies, which is on the Kwanda River in the Caprivi. We went in a westerly direction towards Rundu. We had a base, an operational base we were working from in Rundu called Fort Foot, which had been established not too long before then, so that they could be closer to us in terms of theater of operations and contact. It wasn't in the main base at Rundu, it was outside on the river. But it was exactly what we needed, and we'd worked from there late on many occasions. It was a very nice base to work from. We cut across into Angola before we got to the border which demarcates the end of West Caprivi. We cut through into Angola, and our brief was that we'd meet up with Unita. We hadn't gone very far. Once we crossed the border, we bumped into Unita. They were in their gas and Euro trucks, and they were ahead of us. So we're thinking we're going in formation. No, these guys on the dirt track, in the dust, one behind the other, and they're just going. And they kick up a lot of dust. And we had goggles on, things like that, to mitigate the dust in our eyes. And we followed them. And we didn't know how far we were going to go. They said, no, we're going to their base. Their base was just a place under the trees in the middle of nowhere. And this is where they'd been operating from for a long time. Now, you need to understand, when you work with local partisan or resistance people, which is one of the tasks of special forces, is you need to understand them, their capabilities, how they work, their hierarchy structure, etc., which was important for us. Did any of us speak much Portuguese? Smatterings here and there. We didn't have anybody who really spoke Portuguese, so they were going to provide a translator for us. So between the UNITA guys and our guys, we could translate and make sure that we understood each other clearly, so that we could go and meet the objectives of the operation. But we found a big reluctance from them to move during the day. When we got there, they said, no, we're not going to move. And then, no, we're not going to move, and not going to move. And by the third day, we were getting pretty tired of this. We want to go out, and we want to go and stir up the hornet's nest. We want to get out there and go and do something. Now, I'd had enough Latin at university and at school to be able to understand some Portuguese, not all of it. But when you tell something to somebody and they're telling it, and what you're getting back, that feel that you get, it's not the same. And I said to Flip Marks, I said, this is not going down. What we are saying to our translator and what he's saying to the other guys is not the same, or what they're saying back to us is the same, but what we are saying is not being conveyed. they were telling us that we had to wait because the instruction come from Jonas Savimbi and one of his senior officers by the name of Chiwali, that we had to wait because there was too much movement in the air with the enemy aircraft, and there was enemy on the ground, and hey, that's another day in Africa. You got to be able to deal with this. Flip Marx is not the most patient of guys. Professional soldier, great. But don't anger him and don't delay him and don't tell him the truth. So we're standing there with all these guys, the interpreters doing this, and I said to Flip, no, this is not this. Flip turned around and gave the guy a bunch of fives in the face. Took him down like a sack of potatoes, right down. Wow, the stir that this caused. The guys stood back. Some of the guys cocked their rifles and so on. And the Unita guys, we standing there waiting for them. We got our hands on our pistols, like ready, like the gunfight at the OK Corral. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit, but that's sort of how it felt like. No, they're not going to talk to us. So they walked away. We created an international incident. So they reported back to Jamba, who reported then to Jonas Savimbi. Jonas Savimbi didn't talk directly to us, but through Chief of Staff Intelligence and the senior hierarchy in the South African Defence Force. They went to Hannes Venter. Then Hannes Venter came to us and told us we need to make amends and we need to do what they're going to do. Wrong thing to tell the guys when they're in the bush and they're ready to go. So what do? Bye, guys. We start up our Unimogs and we start moving. Now, we were ready to charge down the road and do everything, and they tried to stop us. So they had vehicles in front of us, so these guys and Urals, and we were going to follow the path. The path more or less was in the direction that we were going to go. We were going more or less straight north. We followed a compass bearing and we were going to go through the bush. But we followed these guys for a while. We came across one of the other vehicles who was coming back, and they asked us to please assist them before we continued. It was a gas truck, and it broken its rear axle at the back. Now, what do you do in the bush if you've got a broken rear axle and you don't have guys to find parts for you? You make an axle. So what do you do to make an axle? There's a lot of Rhodesian teak in this particular area where we were in, and I watched the guys from Unita go and hack down a tree which was suitable that they thought would make the axle. It took them about 4 hours. They cut out the whole thing. Okay, the half shaft went into the differential at the back. They hammered this thing in, pushed it in, put the wheel on, started up, and they drove off. They went back behind us, and they continued. It was an eye-opener for me.
Unbelievable.
Anyway, we then continued north. We carried on driving. So we would drive in a formation with the two vehicles in the front and one at the back, a V formation. So these two were scouts in the front, and we drive it more or less on a compass bearing. And the bush that we were in, there were a lot of, if I mentioned now, the Rhodesian teak, Mopani trees, thorn trees, things like that. But it's fairly open. So you find you've got a lot of canopy at the top, some bush underneath. It's not the rainy season yet, but there's it's still fairly dry. And we were moving, and so we were covering a good 60 kilometers a day. So we would get up early in the morning, wait for first light check that we were safe, do first parade on our vehicles. We go out. We've been constant radio communication with each other. We weren't far apart. The bush dictated how close and how far apart you are from each other. And we were driving. And if you saw things, you report them, and this is what we did. First 2 or 3 days, there was not much to see. A lot of game. I saw black rhino that I haven't seen in ages. I saw a lot of black rhino. I saw sable antelope that were magnificent, big. A lot of giraffe, buffalo. Didn't see any elephant like this. And on the third day, we were driving along, and here's this lonesome figure walking along, coming towards us. So it was lunch, near the heat of the day, lunchtime. So we pulled over. We could see very far. I mean, our line of sight was most probably 400 or 500 meters under the trees. So we parked under the trees. We camouflaged our vehicles, and this guy came walking up to us. He was part of one of the Bushman tribes in the area. He spoke a little bit of Afrikaans. Now, how does a Bushman guy speak a bit of Afrikaans? He most probably was well into his 50s, 60s. He'd been a professional hunter with South African Afrikaner hunter groups who'd been up there. Then he'd worked for some of the mining operations because South Africa had a lot of interest further up in Angola. And he used to be a professional hunter for them and used to take people out. So he could speak a few words of Afrikaans. It was interesting to talk to this guy. He had offcuts of the South African Defence Force uniform, that brown nutria that we used to have, and a bit of loincloth. and a spear that he'd made, a knife that he made, and he had an old rifle. I think it was a Mauser that he used to carry. That's what he lived on. And we said to him, when last had he seen people? And he hadn't seen people in something like 4 or 5 months. He'd heard them in the distance. He'd seen aircraft, but he hadn't seen anyone.
Good grief.
So we continued. I remember one particular day, and it's funny, this is God's country. And I mean that. It was like Eden. We're driving along, and they obviously had a bit of rain in the area, and some of the grass had come out and was green and beautiful. And we came over a small escarpment, not high. And there was a scene in front of us of a low waterfall, most probably only about 2 stories high, coming down into a valley. And there was zebra, and there were impala, a whole lot of other game that were there. It was just beautiful. And we actually just stopped. We stopped. I nearly got bitten by a black mamba there as we're sitting under our vehicle, because there's not much shade. So you sit under your vehicle is there, and if you jump on it. And I'm sitting looking down, and next thing I see this thing coming at me, and I'd been reading a book. And I looked down, and then I looked up, and I looked down again. It was coming at me, and I recognized it was a black mamba. I'm not going to fire a shot in anger or anything like that. And I was trying to get rid of this thing. So I picked a branch, and I tried to swat it with this thing, but it got entangled in the branch, and I nearly landed the thing on top of me. Anyway, I threw it away eventually, and it disappeared. And the guys who were some distance away couldn't understand my antics. They thought I'd been stung by a bee or something like it. They didn't know, but sort of one of those things. Anyway, then we continued on our road north, on our bearing north, and we came over a rise, and before we knew it, we were on the runway, the old Mavinga runway. Still perfectly serviceable, a lot of soil and gravel on top, but you could land an Antonov 24, or maybe even the bigger ones on there. You could certainly land some of the fighter aircraft on the runway. So it was big enough still to be used in operation. And that we had to report back in our daily situation report to HQ. And then our brief was from there to turn west and to go to the Quito River, which we did. Now, at this stage, we hadn't seen any aircraft. We'd seen some vehicle tracks. We'd only seen that Bushman. We'd seen nothing at this stage at all. It's a bit of an anticlimax if you're expecting this, because you feel like a porcupine with your quills out, you're ready to do anything, and there's nothing going on, you see.
Yeah.
So we turn in a westerly direction, and we go towards the Quito River. It took us about a day and a half before we got there, and it's quite easy to spot once you get close to the river. All of a sudden, you notice this undulating ground, and you start seeing thicker riverine bush and so on, and it stands out. You saw that long before we could see anything else, but we couldn't see to the other side because it's all flat bush, looked the same. So we decided to go into the all-round defensive position with our vehicles parking out, so that with the dangerous side facing out, so that we could move in any direction we had to, under cover of the trees, and we were waiting. Our instructions were that we had to pick up some members of the small teams that had been operating that area, and we had to take them with us because they were going to be doing something else, which was fine.
Greg,
so
we have to pause again, I'm afraid. It's really irritating, but we'll pick up from the point where you pick up the small teams. I'll let you know if we have to wait 10 minutes, and if we do, I'll send you a fresh link.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Signing off for a little while.